Hello, my name is Oscar Fire, and welcome to what doesn't feel like the best camera framing. It's really difficult to frame my camera properly because my monitors are elevated above my head, so my camera's actually like basically where my hairline is, and it's kind of annoying because it's like I got this. I mean, look, I've got this background here, right? I've got the displays, I got the little corner thing, and everything. But if I don't angle it, but I gotta angle it down so that I'm actually properly in frame. But then again, I don't want my wastebasket that's kind of hovering in the corner there to just be really obvious. But then my head's not centered well, and I don't know how to really fix this. So you know what? We're just gonna go with the jank unprofessionalism because that's what I've been doing for years, and I don't see why I should change now. Anyway, hello, my name's Oscar Fire. And we are here to talk about the final book of the Dark Legacy of Shannara, Witch Wraith. I almost didn't frame that correctly. But we're here to talk about this book, because I finally finished reading it. And it took me forever to finish reading it, because goodness gracious, this is probably the best mediocre book I've ever read in my life. That is probably the meanest thing I could have possibly said about it. But it's not wrong. I feel like I hinted at it in the last video, but I don't remember because I've not edited that video yet. Fun fact, I'm actually recording this video when I still have yet to edit the previous 4 videos in this book review / book commentary / whatever the hell you want to call it series. And it's going to make it really janky because usually rewatching it when I'm editing it gives me a more solid, it more solidly plants in my head what I'm saying and thinking, or what I said and thought before. Now I'm kind of just I feel like I'm riding a little more off the flying by the seat of my pants, I guess. That's the metaphor I was looking for. But yes, so I finished with Witch Wraith. I finished the Dark Legacy of Shannara. And I, once again, find myself a little more disappointed than I originally was when I first read this series. I definitely remembered enjoying this a little more back when I first read it. And this time around, I'm just like, maybe my perspective is colored by having, just recently read Legends and just recently having read Genesis and being disappointed, of course, by the conclusion of Genesis. But of course, the funny thing is that maybe it's precisely because I was disappointed by the conclusion of Genesis that I was disappointed by the conclusion of this one. Because they actually have extremely similar problems, which is that this is the only book where things really start to happen. Of course, in Genesis, the first 2 books of that trilogy were actually pretty good. They're actually great, actually. I'm not going to lie. They were great books. They were really good at establishing the tone and the feel. And I'm lowering that slightly. Gosh, I'm so low. Anyway, but they were really great at establishing the tone and the feel of the world of Genesis or Shannara. And then the ultimate problem with the 3rd book is just that it rushed to the conclusion. This is the completely opposite, where the setup of the first 2 books, first of all, was incredibly boring, incredibly uninteresting, very teen drama-y, versus, kind of mature fantasy storytelling. And then we get to this book and things finally start to happen. Most of it's actually pretty decent to good. Though it does feel like there's a lot of dropped plot threads and characters and a lack of actual and there's some resolution but not enough resolution. So, I'm actually not sure how to do this review, because I have 2 videos in mind, and I think I might actually change up my normal formula, which is, usually do a book review, and then do a series review. In no small part because this is the only book where anything narratively really happens that's actually particularly compelling or interesting. It didn't piss me off, like the death of Kyber Lesidil or the destruction of the Druid expedition. This is the only one, where events really happen. And I almost feel like I should just talk about the general series in this video, and then make the next video kind of a shorter one where I talk about like I had that idea, right? I had that video where I reimagined Genesis a little bit, and reimagined it as a slightly different narrative without changing anything fundamentally. I want to do that again here, and I feel like I want to make that a separate video, but I kind of want to combine my broader thoughts here into this video and just make this one super long. So that's, I think, what we're going to do. Now, I decided to take this notebook here and write down some of my thoughts, because a lot of things happen, and a lot of them irk me. A lot of them irk me. So we're going to go, and there's like 4 things that I really, really wanted to talk about. And I'm sure there's a couple of other things that I'm going to come back to at some point. I think first things first is something I really genuinely don't like about this series is the fact that it relies a lot on characters kind of behaving like idiots. I literally wrote here, it's heavily dependent on the idiot ball, on characters literally grabbing the idiot ball and just making really, really bad decisions for relatively arbitrary reasons. There's Rayling Omsford's quest to... First of all, there's Rayling Omsford's quest to find Grianne Omsford, bring her back to face off against the Straken Lord. I almost forgot his name. Not his name, his title. Tail Riveraine's his name. And that, first and foremost... Oops, that is not what I wanted to hit. I'm checking something. But, that, first and foremost, really bothered me. Because... Why? Why? I mean, I kind of get it. He's like, okay, we don't have any, I can understand the thought process that goes into why Rayling thinks they need to find Grianne Omsford on the off chance that she's still alive, which, as we all know, she was. And we've known she's been alive the entire time as a fairy creature, basically. But the fact that he basically drives himself towards his goal in a single-minded fashion, and kind of doesn't tell anyone what he's going to do, why they're going to do it, and all that, it all irks me, because it feels to me like there's not enough people asking crucial questions around Rayling. It's very weird that Rayling, who is clearly an immature teenage boy... It's really weird that Rayling, as an immature teenage boy, kind of takes command of this part of the story. Like, there's no reason people would follow him in this regard. Nothing, except for Mirai Leah. It doesn't strike me there's any reason why anyone would follow him on this one. And that's really, it's really bothersome to me, because, again, the quest he's on in this book, and in the previous book, I suppose, is very, how do I put this? It's just such a long shot kind of quest. It's way more of a long shot than finding the missing Elfstones, because at least the missing Elfstones, they had that vision from the blue Elfstones that told them where they were. They figured out where they were through the use of the blue Elfstones. So they had a concrete objective, at least, or at least a semi-concrete objective. This one's just completely off the wall, and yet everyone's following him, even though it's a suicidally risky thing, and eventually it kills Farshawn Wreck, one of the few characters I actually kind of liked in this story. The old rover flyer. I got very irked by his death. Like a lot of other deaths, just seemed very pointless and silly and meaningless, and I don't know why it happened. And it's just, I don't know. I don't see the point of this quest. I don't understand the point of that quest. I feel like Terry was just looking for an excuse to bring back his favorite character, Which, I mean, legitimately, Grian Omsford is probably one of the best characters he ever wrote. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. You know, when she shows up in Fall of Shannara, you know, a few hundred years from now, you know, she's the only really good part of that series. So, you know, it's like, it's clear that he had an idea of how to write her and how to make her actually interesting and actually compelling. So, I don't know. And then there's another, okay, there's a lot of like super interconnected elements. They all end up kind of tying together. Because one of the things I really didn't like in Rayling's quest to find Grian Omsford is the thing that happens in the middle of that quest. And this goes back to my displeasure back in Legends of Shannara at the very poor romance in that one. You know, where basically the two characters are kind of confused but interested in each other, kind of like teenage puppy love, and then they decide to have sex, and then one of them dies, right? Well, this happens again, twice in this series, but only resolves in the third book, where, first of all, it's Rayling and Mirai, right? Where there's this love triangle between Rayling and his twin brother Redden and Mirai Leah. And it's not... And there's no... And, you know, it's like they don't... It's kind of, again, it's another situation of puppy love between the boys and the girl. And then when one of the boys disappears, the girl decides to pursue the other one, Rayling. Also, I got really irked by the fact that he's named Rayling, and... Of course, it culminates... Well, it doesn't culminate, but, you know, the whole love triangle thing gets resolved by Rayling Mirai. And that is... I hated that. I don't mean to make that a question, but I kind of hated it. I hated that that's how it resolved. Because it goes back to my complaints about the romance, quote unquote, in Legends, where it's like it feels super modern and it doesn't feel very natural. You know, it's like we are just expected as the reader to believe that, well, this is a meaningful resolution to this romance plot without any of the actual hardships, any of the actual journey, any of the actual characterization that is required to make the romance mean something. You know, and it's not like the romance has to be super deep. I cannot remember who Will Omsford... I can't remember the Rover girl's name, and it really irks me. But it's been a very long time since I read that, you know, because I've read every single Shannara book in the interim. And I can't remember the Rover's name off the top of my head. But... it's not like when they get together, you know, and return to Shady Vale to start a family. It's not like that. It's not like that was a super deep part of the story. Because, I mean, let's be honest, a lot more happened, a lot more emotional depth is the wrong word. But, you know, I'm trying to, that's the concept I'm trying to get across. A lot more emotional elements occurred between Will and Amberle and makes their parting all the more tragic. You know, whereas Will meets the Rover, you know, about halfway into the book, and then she disappears before she reappears towards the end. You know, and eventually, and, you know, runs away from her clan to live with Will. And, you know, that's not exactly it wasn't exactly a super deep story, but it felt like it meant something. Whereas this doesn't. And that really irks me. It super, super irks me. Because, again, it feels super modern. It feels like a super modern interpretation of how relationships and sex should go together. Where sex is an early thing, not a late thing. And, I mean, you can have whatever opinion you want on that. I'm not here... I have my own opinion, obviously, and you can tell what it is. but it's still irksome because when you put sex early on into relationships, it has a tendency, it has a tendency on an intrinsic level, not even from like a moral perspective or a personal preference perspective, but on an intrinsic writing level, it has a tendency to drag down and debase the relationship in a lot of ways, because it takes the part of a romantic relationship, the part that's the most intimate and in a lot of ways the most meaningful, and turns it into something very basic. And I just find that very irksome. And I wish stories wouldn't do that half as much, because it feels very porny at the end of the day. It feels like something that's more fitting for, if not necessarily pornography itself, for like some sort of erotic story, rather than a story that is trying to be meaningful. And then of course Terry doubles down on this in the very next chapter, where Aifenglow and Simrian have sex when they get to Arishag. And the way I say Arishag makes it hilarious because, like, once again, there's another sexual pun in there. Ha 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 ha. And like the double whammy really, I remember it really bothered me when I first read it, and it bothered me this time too. But this time it bothered me because I was casting a much more critical eye on this story, and I just realized it's like, oh, he literally had two pairs of characters basically do the exact same thing 2 chapters in a row. And that felt so lazy. Especially because it's not exactly like the Aifenglow-Simrian relationship is particularly deep either. It's the exact same thing. Simrian has as unrequited affection for Aifenglow, and Aifenglow, in a very teenage girl sort of way, is trying to figure out, do I like him back? And bear in mind, this is after she's, dealing with the trauma, quote unquote, of the loss of Bombax, the borderman, her former lover. And this is honest first, and this is also, by the way, the thing I skipped talking about did I skip talking about? I don't remember. I'm going to talk about it again, and if I talked about it before, you could probably skip like the next 60 seconds. Where I skipped talking about this in the first book of the series, where Terry spends like a paragraph or two just talking about like Aifenglow's like head, talking about how she basically she's like defending her relationship with Bombax, where basically they're not married yet, but they're having sex. And for some reason, Terry feels this very weird compulsion to talk about the fact that the two of them are having sex outside of marriage. And I'm really confused because I'm thinking, this is what a liberal author in the year 2008 would talk about. Where he's like, oh, he's going to stick it to those Christians, who believe in sex inside the bounds of marriage and not outside of the bounds of marriage. And I'm going to talk about, well, if they basically love each other, then what difference does it make? And I'm just sitting there very confused. Because I'm like, this is not even something I've considered in the context of Shannara. I don't think about sex in Shannara, but to the extent that I do, I'm just like, well, they're not going to have, Judeo-Christian mores anyway, so I don't really care. And then he just spends a whole paragraph or two talking about it, and I'm just like, what? Do people in the Four-Lands even care about this? They probably don't. And it just irked me. And then he does this in this book where, the characters, bone in completely meaningless sexual not completely meaningless, but in what, basically, when the relationships aren't cemented yet, they're having sex. And it's like, Terry kind of accidentally argued against his own point with that. It's like, well, if they really care about each other, what difference does it make if they have sex? Well, I guarantee you that Rayling and Mirai don't totally know how they feel about each other when they have sex. It's not really resolved until afterwards. And the same thing with Aifenglow and Simrian. And it just got me. It just really got me because it felt so shallow, And the worst part too is that, of course, later in the book, Simrian dies defeating Adinja Oral, the Prime Minister of the Federation. And the funniest part to me is the fact that, Cimmerian's death actually does feel suitably tragic. I actually felt kind of bad for Aifenglow in that regard. Because I feel like, the relationship wasn't given enough time. It wasn't given a little more time to grow. Necessarily, grow is the wrong word. Because it kind of is in the same stable spot it had been since since Aifenglow realized that Cimmerian loved her, But at the same time, they had spent enough time working together and being a team that when he sacrifices himself to basically save Arling, I kind of felt like, yeah, okay, it's like, no, I feel something here. This is a very sad outcome. I am okay with this. I'm okay with this. If the order of events in between the various characters had been more cleanly defined, no, not more cleanly defined. If it had been rearranged, sorry, that was the wrong phrase at all. That was the wrong phrase entirely. If it had been rearranged a little bit to create more emotional buildup before the tragic ending, everything that whole thing probably would have been great. If there had been a little bit more time spent with maybe, I don't know, Aifenglow talking to Cimmerian about Bombax instead of her never really bringing it up to anyone in spoken words, and instead of it all being inner monologue, that actually probably would have been pretty neat. That probably would have been a pretty good subplot. That's not what happened. And I'm very annoyed and upset by that. But that's enough about the romantic relationships. Something else that really irks me, though, in this story is the fact that at the end of the last book, of course, Stoon, the assassin, attacks the Druid airship. I don't remember the name of the ship. And destroys it, and everyone's scattered all over the place. Arling is nearly killed with the bearer of the Elcris seed. She's nearly killed, and then she's found by a couple of strangers, and one of them steals the Elcris seed and then give her over to the Federation by accident. And the whole part with the seed being stolen, I mean, the obvious reason for it is that if she had the seed on her, then Adinja Oral would have taken it, and who knows what would have happened with it. And this is a big problem with a lot of this story, where it's like it feels like Terry had to like kind of force a lot of events to happen to prevent otherwise logical outcomes from happening. If Arling has the seed on her, then it's going to be taken by the Federation crew, for example, right? If Tail Riverine decides to attack Arborlon before Arishag, then Arborlon's going to be destroyed, and the Elcris is going to be completely destroyed before our heroes can successfully restore the Elcris. And other things like that happen. And it's kind of annoying because it's not very good writing. It's very much or like I mentioned, one of the previous reviews. I don't remember which one. The whole thing where the druids had to be destroyed because otherwise the existence of 5 or 6 druids in the 4 lands would result in extremely different outcomes for a lot of the events in the 4 lands. But it's all very arbitrary. For some reason, I don't know why, Terry could not seem to conceive of a story where, the events he wanted to happen could happen. Of course, my argument is that maybe the events that should have happened were completely different from the events he wanted to happen. Because as it is, this story is very kind of bland. A big part of the problem with Dark Legacy is that it's very bland, and it ends very much on the status quo, and it's very irksome to me that it ends on the status quo. There's a lot of things that could have been done differently and resulted in a significantly better story. And it's just very, very annoying. It's very annoying to me. There's the matter of Adinja Oral herself, in fact. to this point, even now, I don't fully understand what her actual motivations were, because they kind of seem to shift a lot during the story, where it's like, oh, she wants to she wants to join the Druids so she could control them, but she constantly, but she and her spy, the spy in Arborlawn, are constantly doing things that undermine that very goal, and it's just very baffling. I don't understand why. I don't understand what her end goal is, because she has, because her spy, the creature, has, assassinates the king, and then tries to frame Phaedon for going, and Phaedon Elesidil, the successor to the king of the elves, tries to frame him for like murdering Shauna Resh, the captain of the Home Guard, because yet again another captain of the Home Guard gets murdered, because can't do anything original in these stories. Captain of the Home Guard surviving? Why would that happen? And I'm just. You could tell that I'm very frustrated by this story. You could tell I'm super frustrated by the story, because there's a lot of things that are just very repetitive, very boring, very not well implemented. And then, of course, there is the matter of Adinja's spy in Arborlawn, which is Jera Elesidil, which is Elich Elesidil's wife, the uncle of Aefin and Arling, which is, and brother of the king, which is in and of itself, like, this subplot had all the inklings of actually being a great subplot if the misdirects, because there was a couple of misdirects on who the spy was, because it's implied to be Phaedon, because Phaedon Elesidil is very much like self-centered and not really working in the best interests of his realm, at least as far as we, the outside observer, can see it. He's being very, his actions are kind of vaguely nonsensical, not totally nonsensical. They are very isolationist, but they're not like sensibly isolationist. So he's very, he's very stupid, basically. He's a very stupid character, and it's implied that he could be the spy because he is, he's in the best position to cause damage. And then, of course, the other misdirect is Elich himself, because Elich is, is the confidant of Arling and Elesidil, and is the only one who's really been close by every time Aefin gets attacked, and he's the only one who could really have enough knowledge to actually act on that, unlike what Aefin has discovered and whatnot. But of course, the actual culprit is Jera, his wife. And why? Like, genuine question, why is it Jera? Jera is not a character in the story. She is a background character at best who shows up a couple of times, and I don't even think necessarily has any spoken lines. Maybe two in the first book, and doesn't show up in the second book at all. And she's the spy. And it's like, why did you write this like this? Why? Like, the misdirect was actually pretty, not even the misdirect, the mystery, really. The mystery was really good. The misdirect would have been good if Jera was actually, or Jira, however you pronounce her name, was actually a character, but she's not. And so it just kind of comes out of left field. And realistically, she's not close enough to Aefin, not from what we see, to actually know as much as Elich would. And that's really annoying, because there was the inklings of a good subplot there, albeit another unnecessary subplot. And gosh, unnecessary subplots are just the name of the day in late Shannara. Goodness gracious me. Like, just unnecessary, infiltrations and all this stuff. It's just, and too many characters again also. Gosh, and goodness gracious, kill me now. This is ridiculous. These are not good books. These are not good books, man. That Dark Legacy is the last series that can make any claim to being halfway decent. But after that, it's just a shit show, honestly. Oh my goodness gracious. And at the end of the day, it's not like this is even a good story, because of course I forgot how they actually found the elf stones. And I didn't realize it was actually the cheapest way that it could have possibly been done, which is in order to escape Tail Riverine's tracker, whose name I forget, Tarwick, never mind, I remembered it. In order to escape the tracker, Redden, Omsford, Oriantha, and Tesla Dart escape back into the Forbidding, right? Because the Forbidding's walls are breaking down, but the Forbidding still exists because the Elcris is technically still alive, albeit, basically an emaciated husk. And they escape back in the Forbidding, and while they're making their way through the Forbidding to return to the Four Lands in a different spot, they come across a giant hole in the ground, basically, and completely by happenstance, and talking vaguely out of character, I noticed, Tesla Dart explains that, hey, there's a bunch of old magic down there that we never retrieve because it's a bunch of old magic and we don't trust it, even though they're dark fairy creatures and they should trust magic. Doesn't make sense. And they realize, wait, the elf stones could be down there, and Redden insists on going down there, and guess what? They find the elf stones. And it's like, wow, okay. So at the end of the day, that expedition at the beginning of the first book was actually a pretty good idea. And then they lose him again. And I cannot reiterate, and I've mentioned it multiple times during my Shannara reviews over the course of the past few years, talking about that. I cannot reiterate how much it pisses me off that Terry not only has them gain only one set of elf stones out of the 4, but then never revisits it again. What a stupid fucking writing decision. Pardon my French. I don't usually swear in these too much. But what a stupid writing decision. Like, why would you even do that? Why would you introduce the idea of the elf stones, show that there are 4 other sets of elf stones, which I think we've vaguely been aware of for a while now, and then only have one of them get retrieved, and then not even bring them up when we go back to the Forbidding and Fall of Shannara? Like, what kind of stupid-ass writing is that? Like, that makes me so mad, because the big part of Shannara, and I think I brought this up in either the first or the second review, I think it was the second review of this series, I brought this up before. The big part of Shannara is the adventure and the fun and the discovery. Even if the magic is evil, even if the magic is the Ildach, right? Even if it's the Ildach, the fun of Shannara is discovering these things. That's what makes Shannara cool. That's what makes Shannara fun. Okay? It's not this battle between magic and science that the last 2 series become all about. That's not what Shannara is about. Shannara is about the magic because it's a fantasy series. You can add in science. I don't care. I like the airships. The airships are kind of cool. I mean, they have their downsides. I've pointed out before. The airships definitely get rid of some of the adventure. But at the end of the day, the thing that makes Shannara awesome is the magic. And the fact that magic was in fact a part of our primary world all along. That's what makes Shannara cool. That's what makes Shannara fun. And the fact that Terry basically constantly just shoves the magic off to the side and just goes, I don't give a shit about the magic anymore, and just makes science the be-all, end-all of Shannara is just the most infuriating thing, because it ruins Shannara. That's the thing about it. It ruins Shannara. It makes Shannara no longer as interesting. It makes it no longer unique. Because Shannara basically just becomes our primary world, but with airships and laser cannons. Because that's basically what, because that's what airships are, and flash ships. That's what flash ships are. Flash ships are laser cannons, basically. And I find that so aggravating, because because having more recently read, of course, now the original Shannara trilogy, Heritage of Shannara and all that, I realize now that it's the magic in the world that makes it good, that makes it a great, great world to immerse yourself in. And when he takes away that magic, when he questions the magic, when he makes it so that in this series, the elves hate the magic, and the Omsfords, or more precisely, their mother, hates the magic. And so no one's embracing magic, and everyone fears the magic, and the druids are weak, and all this. It diminishes the story, and it tears it down. And it makes it feel so sad. And of course, we go to the future, and I mean, the druids will be, in better shape under Aethinglow's leadership. But it doesn't really matter because the story's not about the druids anymore. And the story isn't about magic anymore, and about discovery, and about journeying to new places. And even when it is in the Fall of Shannara, it doesn't feel the same. It's not the same kind of adventure. It's not a story of discovery. It's just a political story about, trying to figure out how to make peace with the scar, and it's not what it should be. And I find that incredibly depressing, and I find that very sad. And I wish that Terry had taken it in a different direction. Yeah. There's one other point I have here, but I'm actually going to leave that for the follow-up video to this, which may very well be actually the end of my reviews of Shannara, because I've been thinking about it a lot, and I'm not sure I really want to reread Defenders and Fall of Shannara, because not only have I read them relatively recently, but I just know that I'm going to say pretty much all the same things I have said here in this video, no less. I'm just going to end up reiterating a lot of those points again. And I don't really see much point in doing that, Granted, I would probably come up with much more coherent, cogent videos than I did back when I made those originally, back in back in the day. Between 2017 and 2021, I think it was. When I made those videos originally. And I don't really see the point much anymore. Not only that, but if you can see from this huge stack of books here, I actually have a big backlog of books that I need to actually start reading. Not all of them. A couple of them are copies of books I already own. And a couple of them are like reference books. But, I've got here like a couple of nonfiction analyses of Tolkien, philosophy of Tolkien, understanding Middle Earth here. Got here Memories Legion, which is, I believe, a collection of short stories set in the Expanse universe. We've got Tales from the Perilous Realm here. And my mother bought me this book called The Traveling Cat Chronicles, and she bought that several years ago for me, and I have yet to read that. And I'm just gonna take some time to read these books here. I'm gonna take some time to read these. Also Nero says hi back here. She's just kind of chilling back there. But I kind of want to read those. I'm kind of like, I might as well start reading some of the books that I've been kind of neglecting for my Shannara rereads. So I think that's what the future holds for a little while here. But there's still yet another video to make, so look forward to that. So anyway, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Yeah. There's still another video, so until next time, everybody, assuming I edit this sometime in a timely fashion. What was that?